They told him the boat was cursed, that everyone who owned it vanished into the sea. But when veteran Ethan Cole bought that old fishing boat for just $500, he wasn't chasing ghost stories. He was chasing peace. He had no idea the Sea Whisper held something far darker than a legend, something people were willing to kill for. When his loyal German shepherd, Rex, started scratching at the deck one stormy night, Ethan discovered a secret that could expose a powerful company and save countless lives. What happened next would test his faith, his courage, and prove that miracles often rise from the deepest storms. If you believe that loyalty, faith, and truth still matter in this world, stay till the end of this story. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video so more hearts can feel the power of hope. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your family. The wind that swept through the harbor town of Rockford, Maine, carried the smell of salt and rust, a mix of sea brine and old iron that seemed to settle into every plank of wood and every weathered face along the docks. It was early March, the time of year when the Atlantic was still more ice than water, and the sky hung low like a sheet of dull pewter. Waves slapped against the hulls of moored trawlers with a hollow rhythm, and gulls screamed overhead, their cries sharp as broken glass. Rockford was a town of survivors, fishermen, boatwrights, widows of the sea. Every street had a story soaked into its boards, and none of them had a happy ending. Into this salt-bitten world came Ethan Cole, a man who wore the sea's hardship in his posture even before he'd touched the water again. At 45, Ethan carried himself with the disciplined stillness of a former Marine. He had spent 20 years serving on and off distant shores, where he learned to keep his words few and his senses sharp. His hair was cropped short and peppered with gray, his jaw strong and square beneath a shadow of stubble. The faint scar that ran from the edge of his temple to just under his right cheekbone caught the light whenever he turned his head, a thin white mark left by a roadside explosion in Kandahar. Ethan's face was the kind that told stories without speaking. There was a weariness there, yes, but also a kind of quiet defiance, the look of a man who had seen death and decided to live anyway. At his side trotted Rex, a German shepherd with a thick sable coat that gleamed silver where the sunlight broke through the overcast. The dog's amber eyes were alert, intelligent, and calm. The kind of calm that came from training and loyalty, not fearlessness. Rex was 8 years old, once a K9 service dog attached to Ethan's unit overseas. When Ethan's service ended, he fought to adopt Rex, saying he owed the dog his life after Rex had dragged him out of the wreckage of an overturned vehicle during an ambush. The two had been inseparable ever since. Rex moved with a soldier's awareness, his nose twitching as they walked down the weathered planks of the dock. Ethan had come to Rockford for one reason: to start again. His father and grandfather had both been fishermen before him, men who knew the ocean's moods better than their own. They'd died on it too, swallowed by a storm that locals still whispered about. But Ethan didn't come here chasing ghosts. He came seeking peace. And for a man who'd seen too much of war, the sea, with all its mystery and danger, felt almost like home. The small harbor master's office was a squat building that leaned slightly to one side, its white paint blistered by salt air. Inside, behind a desk cluttered with forms and rusted keys, sat Marjorie Tills, the harbor master. Marjorie was in her late 50s, tall and thin, her weathered skin the color of driftwood, her gray hair tied up in a messy knot that escaped in wisps around her sharp face. She had been working the docks since her husband's trawler went down in the nor'easter of '97, leaving her with a small pension and a heart too stubborn to quit. Her voice carried the rasp of cigarettes and hard winters. "So you're the Marine," she said, without looking up from her paperwork. "The one asking about old boats no one wants?" Ethan nodded. "That's me. I heard there's one left on the sailboard. The Sea Whisper." At that, Marjorie finally looked up. Her pale blue eyes narrowed just a fraction, studying him with the caution of someone who's seen too many hopeful men end badly. "You don't want that one, Cole. She's cursed. Every man who's taken her out never came back." Ethan managed a faint smile. "I've been cursed before. Still breathing." Marjorie's lips twitched, not quite a smile. $500, cash only. But don't come crying to me when she drags you down." Ethan took the keys from her calloused hand. "If she's still floating, that's all I need." Outside, the sky had darkened further, clouds pressing low over the harbor like a lid. The Sea Whisper was docked at the far end, half hidden between two newer vessels. Up close, she looked both majestic and tragic. A 40-foot wooden trawler with peeling blue paint and rust bleeding from every bolt. Her name was still faintly legible across the bow, the letters faded and ghost-like. Ethan ran his hand along the railing, feeling the cold metal bite against his skin. There was strength in her bones, he thought, even if time had tried to break her. A voice drifted from behind him. "You sure you know what you're getting into, friend?" Ethan turned to see Cal Harris, an older fisherman standing a few yards away. Cal was in his 60s, broad-shouldered but stooped, his skin leathered by sun and salt, his beard thick and gray like tangled rope. His eyes were deep-set and wary, the eyes of a man who had seen too many disappear into fog. Cal was the kind who didn't speak unless there was something worth saying. "She's bad luck," Cal continued, nodding toward the trawler. "That boat belonged to Arthur Miller, journalist turned fisherman, thought he could expose the big factory up north. One night, he took her out alone and never came back. Coast Guard found his nets, not him. They say sometimes, when the fog rolls in, you can still hear his radio crackling out there." Ethan glanced at Rex, who stood silently beside him, ears perked. "You believe in curses, Mr. Harris?" The old man gave a slow shrug. "After 40 years on the sea, I believe in anything that keeps me alive." He turned to leave, muttering, "Some things are better left buried." By the time Ethan climbed aboard, twilight had bled across the harbor. The deck creaked under his boots, and the air inside the cabin smelled of old diesel and damp wood. A seagull cried somewhere above, the sound long and mournful. Rex sniffed around the galley, tail low but steady. The dog's movements were cautious, deliberate, as if mapping every scent of the ship's past. Ethan found the logbook still on the small table beside the wheel. The last entry was dated 15 years ago. Engine fixed, weather turning, heading out before the tide shifts. Nothing else. Just silence after that. He felt the chill of history in the words. The way a man could vanish into a horizon and leave behind only an unfinished sentence. That night, Ethan decided to sleep on board. The cabin was small but serviceable. He laid out a blanket for Rex near the hatch and stretched out on the narrow bunk. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping lightly against the portholes. The rhythmic sound of waves rocking against the hull was oddly soothing, a lullaby of the deep. But somewhere after midnight, Rex's soft breathing turned to a low growl. His ears stood rigid, and his gaze locked toward the floor beneath the engine room. Ethan sat up instantly, every sense sharpened by instinct. The metallic clang came again, faint, deliberate like something moving below the deck. Rex began scratching furiously at the floorboards, whining between growls. His muscles were coiled tight, his tail stiff. Ethan reached for the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the cabin. Nothing seemed out of place, except that sound, hollow and distant, coming again from the same spot. He crouched beside Rex, pressing a hand to the old wood. A vibration, almost imperceptible, thrummed beneath his palm. It wasn't the shifting of water or the creak of tide. It was something else. Something alive, or trying very hard to be. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own voice trembled. The dog's hackles bristled. Outside, the wind howled through the rigging, and for a heartbeat, Ethan thought he heard another sound beneath it. A whisper, faint and wet, like the ocean itself breathing words. Rex's barking shattered the silence. The beam of the flashlight flickered, and for the first time since returning home, Ethan Cole felt the old coldness of battle wash through him. That sixth sense that told a soldier he wasn't alone. The sea outside groaned, and the hull answered with a slow, metallic echo. Whatever haunted the sea whisper had just woken up. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the fog thick enough to blur the horizon into a seamless sheet of steel. Ethan Cole stood on the deck of the Sea Whisper, the chill of the ocean biting through his flannel shirt. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the dull sky. Rex paced the deck beside him, tail stiff, his nose twitching toward the dark smudge of the boatyard ahead. Whatever had stirred beneath the floorboards last night hadn't made another sound, but the tension in the air lingered like the taste of iron. Ethan guided the boat toward Harris Boatyard, a patchwork collection of rusted sheds and salt-stained planks crouched against the shoreline. The place looked as if it had survived a dozen storms through sheer stubbornness. Inside, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal echoed, the sound of men shaping life out of decay. Cal Harris emerged from one of the sheds, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. In the morning light, the old fisherman looked even more weathered. His face, framed by a tangled beard, was carved deep by years of salt wind. He moved with a deliberate slowness, the kind that came from a back stiffened by decades of hauling nets and fixing engines. "Didn't think you'd bring her in so soon," Cal muttered, eyeing the Sea Whisper. "Most folks don't last a night on her." Ethan offered a dry smile. "Guess I'm not most folks." Cal's gaze lingered on the hull, and something unreadable crossed his face, a flicker of memory or regret. He ran a rough hand along the wooden side, tracing the faded lettering of the ship's name. "You ever hear of a man named Arthur Miller?" Ethan leaned against the rail. "The journalist?" "Yeah, the name's been floating around since yesterday." Cal nodded. "He used to dock here. Smart fella, always asking questions, carrying that little leather notebook around like it was a Bible. Wrote stories for the Portland Chronicle. Said he was looking into Secor Industries. Claimed they were dumping something nasty offshore. One night, he took this boat out alone. Next morning, Coast Guard found her adrift near Blackstone Reef. No Miller, no body, just his mug on the deck and a busted radio." He paused, eyes fixed on the boat's cabin door. "After that, folks started saying she was cursed, that sometimes the lights come on by themselves, even when she's empty. Some say the sea doesn't want her back." Ethan folded his arms, studying the old man's face. "You believe that?" Cal gave a weary chuckle. "I believe in the ocean's memory, son. She doesn't forget. Not the good, not the bad." Before Ethan could reply, a new voice called from across the yard. "Hey, Harris, You got another ghost for me to patch up? It belonged to Jake Turner, a younger mechanic in his 30s with arms like twisted rope and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jake had the look of a man who'd been hardened by both work and disappointment. Short brown hair, sunburned skin, and a thin scar running across his jawline. He'd grown up in Rockford, lost his father in a trawler accident when he was 12, and had been fixing engines since he was old enough to hold a wrench. Jake's humor was dry and defensive, a way to keep people at arm's length. He circled the Sea Whisper, tapping the hull with a wrench. She's a relic, that's for sure. What's your plan with her? Ethan shrugged. Just need her seaworthy. Jake let out a low whistle. That's like saying you just need to dry out the Atlantic. Cal shot him a warning look, but Ethan only smiled faintly. Do what you can. The two men worked most of the afternoon. Jake examined the engine, a corroded diesel relic older than either of them, while Cal replaced some of the deck planks. Rex stayed close to Ethan, his ears flicking at every clang and creak. Every so often, he'd glance toward the cabin door and let out a low growl, quiet but insistent. Ethan tried to dismiss it, but by the time dusk began to fall, that uneasy feeling had crawled back under his skin. Cal straightened, rubbing his lower back. That's enough for today. Don't run her after dark. Bad luck to take her out on the tide she drowned her last man in. Ethan nodded, thanking him, but he didn't share the old man's superstition. He tied the boat at the dock, letting the tide rock it gently against the pilings. The sky had turned the color of bruised steel, and the first mist of rain began to fall again. The harbor lights blinked on one by one, yellow halos in the fog. That night, Ethan sat in the cabin with a cup of black coffee, Rex lying at his feet. The radio hissed softly with static. The creak of the hull was steady and rhythmic, a sailor's lullaby. He tried to convince himself that the sounds beneath the floorboards the night before had been the settling of old timber. But Rex's sudden shift from sleep to alertness shattered the illusion. The dog rose, tail straight, eyes locked on the hatch leading to the engine room. The growl was deeper this time, vibrating through the narrow cabin. Ethan grabbed a flashlight, his heart already drumming. He opened the hatch and descended the short ladder. The beam of light cut through dust and shadow, revealing pipes, rusted bolts, and the dull sheen of oil stains. Then he saw it. One of the metal panels near the base of the floor had been welded shut, the edges uneven, sloppy. Someone had done it in haste. He crouched closer, running his fingers over the rough seams. The metal was colder than the rest, almost unnaturally so. What the hell? He muttered. Rex began barking furiously, paws scraping against the deck above. Ethan's instincts flared. That old sense of imminent danger. He stood, scanning the small space, and thought for a moment he heard something faint beyond the steel, like the slow drip of water, or breathing. He backed away, climbed up the ladder, and closed the hatch. The rain had picked up, drumming against the deck like 1,000 restless fingers. He sat beside Rex, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We'll see what's under there tomorrow," he said quietly. But as he stared out the porthole into the dark, a flicker of light shimmered on the water near the dock, a small pale glow that disappeared as quickly as it came. Ethan blinked, unsure if it was lightning or something else entirely. Rex growled again, low and steady. Whatever secret the Sea Whisper carried, it wasn't content to stay buried. The dawn came slow and pale, casting a silvery mist over Rockford Harbor. The water was so still it looked like glass. the boats moored in quiet lines along the dock. Ethan Cole hadn't slept much. He sat on the narrow bunk inside the cabin of the Sea Whisper, the taste of last night's coffee still bitter on his tongue. Rex lay curled near the hatch, his eyes half closed but never truly resting. The dog's ears twitched every few seconds, responding to sounds that Ethan couldn't hear. The whisper of waves, the creak of rope, the pulse of something unseen beneath them. He waited until the town began to stir before making his move. The harbor's silence lifted as fishermen shouted across the docks. Gulls wheeled overhead, and the smell of salt and diesel filled the air. Ethan took a deep breath, grabbed his toolbox, and knelt by the section of floor where the sloppy weld glinted faintly in the morning light. The memory of the faint dripping sound from the night before still echoed in his mind. He wasn't superstitious, but he trusted his instincts, and Rex's reaction had been too visceral to ignore. He wedged the crowbar into the seam and pushed. The old metal groaned like a wounded animal. After several tries, the weld cracked apart, releasing a faint hiss of trapped air. The smell that rose up was faint but unmistakable. Oil, salt, and something else, metallic and stale. He pried the plate free and set it aside. Rex stepped closer, tail stiff, his head dipping to sniff at the opening. Beneath the floorboards was a small compartment, about 2 feet deep, its edges reinforced with riveted steel. Inside sat a green military-grade ammo box, its surface spotted with rust but still sealed tight, and beside it, a leather-bound waterproof journal wrapped in twine. Ethan lifted the box first. It was heavier than he expected. The journal he handled carefully, its cover rough beneath his fingertips, the edges of the pages swollen slightly from moisture. He laid everything on the cabin table and flicked on the small lantern hanging overhead. The journal's first page bore a neat, deliberate handwriting. Arthur Miller, March 2008. The entries started simple. Notes about fishing routes, weather conditions, engine repairs. But the tone changed quickly. The man who had written these words had been watching something, documenting something dangerous. Miller described ships from Secor Industries, a massive plant up the coast that processed industrial waste, unloading drums into the sea at night, just beyond the shipping lanes. He'd followed them once, taking photographs from a distance, but his next entries grew darker. I've been warned off twice. They know I've seen too much. The sheriff's no help. Maybe he's one of them. Ethan paused, frowning. His fingers traced the edge of the page, where salt had left pale crystals. Beneath the journal lay a folded map of the coastline, dotted with hand-drawn red, circles and numbers, coordinates. Miller had written, "Toxic discharge points confirmed. Fish die-offs increasing. Must get samples." Ethan opened the ammo box next. Inside were small glass vials, each carefully labeled with coordinates and dates, half filled with murky seawater. There were also metal canisters of soil, tied with string, and a handful of black and white photographs sealed in a plastic bag. The images showed industrial barges, discharge pipes running into the ocean, and dead fish floating near the surface. It was evidence, damning evidence. Rex gave a low growl. Ethan looked up sharply. Through the fogged porthole, he saw movement on the pier, a shadow, brief and shifting. He set the papers aside, reaching instinctively for the old revolver he kept in the drawer beneath the table. When he stepped out onto the deck, the fog had thickened again, rolling in off the water like smoke. The docks were empty. But on the opposite side of the harbor, a faint gleam of headlights cut through the mist, paused, then vanished. He crouched near the railing, scanning the shoreline. Rex stood beside him, silent now, every muscle tense. Whoever it was, they were watching, and they knew exactly where to look. Ethan stayed still until the light was gone. Then he returned inside and locked the cabin door. He spread the documents across the table again, forcing himself to think clearly. If Miller had been killed for uncovering this, it meant the same people might still be watching. He picked up the journal again, flipping toward the back. The handwriting had changed. Shaky, rushed. "They've been here. They searched the boat. Sheriff Riggs warned me to stop. Said accidents happen to men who dig too deep. I think this will be my last entry." The page ended there. No signature. Just a dark smear of ink. Ethan exhaled slowly, his stomach tightening. So the curse wasn't the sea. It was something far worse. Men. Later that afternoon, a fisherwoman named Sarah Donnelly approached the dock. She was in her mid-30s, lean and strong, with freckled skin and copper hair tied in a loose braid. Sarah was known around Rockford as one of the few independent fishers still trying to make a living despite the dying catches. Her boat, the Windlass, was tied a few slips away. She gave Ethan a cautious smile, her gray eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're the one who bought the Whisper," she said. Her voice had the husky tone of someone who'd spent half her life yelling over the wind. "People are talking." Ethan studied her a moment. "Let me guess. Cursed, haunted, doomed?" Sarah chuckled softly. "All of the above, but I don't scare easy. I used to see Arthur Miller down here sometimes. He'd talk about the factory. Said it was killing the bay. Everyone thought he was just another journalist chasing ghosts." She hesitated, her expression softening. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Ethan met her gaze. "You ever notice the water looking different?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "A few weeks back, I hauled up a net full of fish with burns on their scales. Thought it was red tide, but maybe..." She trailed off, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. "You should be careful, Ethan. The people who run that plant, they don't like questions." When she left, her words lingered longer than the scent of salt and diesel. Ethan packed the evidence back into the box and locked it in the small compartment beneath the table. The fog outside had thickened again, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Somewhere in that shifting gray, a pair of unseen eyes was still watching. The storm came early, crawling across the Atlantic like a dark, living thing. By afternoon, the sky above Rockford Harbor had turned an ominous green-gray, and the wind howled through the rigging of the Sea Whisper with a shrill, metallic cry. Ethan Cole stood on deck, tightening the mooring lines as rain began to fall in cold, slanted sheets. Rex paced beside him, fur slicked with mist, his amber eyes restless. The dog didn't like the wind. It carried scents of change and danger. As Ethan secured the last rope, a black sedan pulled up along the dock, cutting its engine with a low purr. From it stepped a tall man dressed in a charcoal overcoat, his polished shoes out of place on the wet, grimy planks. He moved with practiced ease, unhurried despite the rain. His hair was slicked back, silver blending into black, and his face was carved with the kind of angular symmetry that came from privilege, not labor. Silas Blackwood, as he would soon introduce himself, exuded an air of command, the quiet arrogance of a man who was accustomed to owning whatever he desired. "Mr. Cole, I presume." The voice was smooth, cultured, but with a weight beneath it, like velvet hiding steel. Ethan straightened, rain running down his jaw. "You've got the advantage, mister." "Silas Blackwood," the man replied, extending a gloved hand that Ethan didn't take. "I represent Secor Industries. You've recently acquired a vessel of interest to us." Ethan's expression hardened. "If you're here about the Sea Whisper, she's not for sale." Blackwood smiled faintly, undeterred. "I understand your attachment, but sentiment aside, this ship has historical and research value. We'd like to purchase her. Say, $50,000, cash." The number hung in the air like a temptation. Ethan studied the man carefully. His suit was too fine for a simple corporate envoy, and there was something cold in his eyes, something predatory. "You don't strike me as the research type," Ethan said. Blackwood's smile thinned. "We all serve our roles, Mr. Cole. I'll give you until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, the offer disappears." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked back to the car. The sedan disappeared into the curtain of rain, leaving behind only the smell of exhaust and unspoken threats. Rex gave a low growl, the fur along his neck rising. Ethan crouched beside him, hand resting on the dog's damp coat. "Yeah," he murmured. "I don't trust him either." By nightfall, the storm hit full force. The wind screamed across the harbor, bending masts and tearing at tarps. Ethan had moved the boat farther out from the docks, hoping to keep it from slamming against the pier. Inside the cabin, lantern light flickered wildly, throwing restless shadows on the walls. Rex lay near the door, muscles tense, ears twitching with every distant crash of thunder. Ethan poured a cup of coffee, the mug trembling slightly in his hand. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, even through the sheets of rain. The evidence, Miller's journal, the vials, the photographs, was still hidden beneath the table in the small steel compartment. He'd planned to leave the next morning, maybe get the material to someone he could trust. But fate had other plans. Rex's sudden growl shattered the rhythm of the storm. He rose, teeth bared, staring at the hatch leading to the deck. Then came the faint clunk of boots on wet wood, too deliberate to be the wind. Ethan set down his cup, grabbed his revolver, and moved to the door. The next sound was unmistakable, the soft click of a latch being tested from the outside. Without hesitation, Ethan threw open the door, the wind howling into his face. Two figures in dark raincoats loomed on deck, their outlines blurred by the storm. "You picked the wrong night!" Ethan shouted, raising his gun. One of them lunged. A flash of steel glinted. Knife, not gun. Ethan fired once into the air, the report swallowed by thunder. "Back off!" Rex charged, a blur of muscle and fury, slamming into the man's knees. The attacker went down hard, his knife skittering across the deck. The second man swung a length of pipe, striking Ethan's shoulder, sending pain shooting down his arm. Ethan staggered but recovered fast, slamming his elbow into the man's ribs. The struggle was brutal, short, and desperate. Then Ethan smelled it. Gasoline. His eyes darted toward the corner of the deck where a third figure crouched, splashing fuel along the boards. Lightning illuminated his face just long enough to burn it into Ethan's memory. Young, clean-cut, terrified. Not a killer, just following orders. "Rex, down!" Ethan yelled, firing again. Not at the men, but at the air above them. The noise broke their nerve. The youngest bolted toward the side, while the others scrambled to the pier. But before they fled, one of them tossed a lighter onto the deck. The flame caught instantly, racing along the slick boards like a serpent of fire. Within seconds, the Sea Whisper was ablaze, orange light clawing at the night sky. Ethan grabbed the ammo box and the journal, shoving them into a sealed lifeboat container. "Hold tight, boy," he shouted as the flames roared closer. He heaved the small container overboard, watching it vanish into the churning waves, carried by the current toward the outline of the old lighthouse far down the coast. The fire reached the cabin. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick. The heat was unbearable. "Go!" Ethan yelled, and together he and Rex leaped into the black, freezing sea. The shock of the water stole his breath, but he kicked hard, breaking the surface. Above them, the sea whisper groaned one last time before exploding in a shower of burning debris. The shock wave hurled them apart. Ethan fought to reach Rex's dark shape struggling against the waves. Somehow, through the chaos, he caught the dog's collar and pulled him close. The current dragged them toward the open water, the glow of the fire fading behind them. Ethan's lungs burned, his mind a blur of salt and pain. But one thought cut through the storm. The evidence is still out there, and so were the men who wanted it buried forever. The world came back to Ethan Cole in fragments. The taste of salt, the weight of water pressing against his chest, and the sharp pain in his ribs each time he tried to breathe. When he opened his eyes, the sky above was a pale blur streaked with gulls. Waves broke gently against the rocky shore. Beside him, Rex lay sprawled on the sand, his sable coat soaked and clumped, his sides rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Relief washed through Ethan stronger than the tide itself. He reached out, resting a trembling hand on the dog's neck. "We made it, boy," he whispered hoarsely. The coastline was unfamiliar, a stretch of rugged Maine shore, where jagged cliffs met dense pine forest. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and cold. Ethan tried to stand, but his legs gave out, forcing him to one knee. That was when he heard the sound of footsteps crunching over wet gravel. A figure appeared from the mist, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy brown coat and a wool cap. His beard was thick but neatly kept, streaked with gray. His eyes, a deep green, widened in shock when he recognized the half-drowned man before him. "Jesus, Ethan Cole?" Ethan blinked through the haze. "Mark. Jensen?" Mark Jensen, his old friend from the Corps, dropped to a crouch beside him, disbelief and concern etched across his weathered features. Mark was in his early 40s, a few years younger than Ethan, with the look of a man who'd traded battlefields for deadlines. After leaving the Marines, he'd become an investigative journalist, stubborn, relentless, the kind who didn't let go of a lead until it either made the front page or got him nearly killed. His once boyish face was now lined by too many sleepless nights and too many truths uncovered. "What the hell happened to you?" Mark asked, helping him sit up. "Boat fire," Ethan rasped. "Sea Corps' men. They tried to—" He stopped, breath catching. "The evidence. I had to throw it overboard." Mark's gaze shifted toward the surf. "You mean that?" Floating just beyond the rocks was a small lifeboat container, battered but intact, wedged between driftwood and seaweed. Mark hauled it ashore, cracking it open with a pocket knife. Inside were the soaked but sealed vials, Miller's leather journal, and the photographs Ethan had risked everything to save. "You're lucky," Mark said, shaking his head. "A couple of fishermen found this drifting at dawn near the lighthouse and called me. I didn't think you'd still be breathing." Rex stirred, struggling to his feet. Mark gave a low whistle. "Still have your shadow, huh? Guess he's tougher than both of us." Ethan managed a faint smile. He always was. They moved to Mark's truck parked nearby. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and wet dog. As they drove toward town, Mark listened in silence while Ethan explained everything. The journal, the sabotage, the night attack. Mark's jaw tightened as he pieced it together. Arthur Miller had been chasing Secor for years, he said finally. I thought it was all rumor, corporate dumping, payoffs to local officials, but this... He tapped the metal box between them. This could bury them. Back in Rockford, Mark's small apartment doubled as his newsroom. Papers littered every surface, along with an aging laptop and a tangle of charging cords. The walls were covered with maps, photos, and scribbled notes. A mine's battlefield. He scanned through the journal pages while Ethan cleaned his wounds. Rex, now dry, slept curled up beside the radiator, occasionally twitching in his dreams. Mark turned the last page and exhaled. Miller wasn't just documenting pollution. He linked Secor to state officials, even a federal inspector. That's why they killed him. They needed his proof gone. Ethan's voice was low. Then we make sure it doesn't disappear again. Mark nodded. I've got contacts in the bureau, people who still care about doing things by the book. He picked up his phone and began dialing. Hours later, after transferring scanned copies of the evidence and sending a full statement, he leaned back with a weary grin. FBI's taking it from here. You just took down an empire, brother. Days passed in quiet recovery. The story hit national news within a week. Secor Industries under investigation for environmental crimes and corruption. Silas Blackwood's face appeared on every screen, walking into a courthouse under heavy guard, his expression calm but hollow. The plant was shut down, its leadership indicted. Rockford Harbor, once poisoned and dying, began to breathe again. A month later, the sea had returned to its gentler rhythm. Ethan stood at the newly rebuilt dock, the scent of pine and salt mingling in the spring air. He'd purchased a small workshop and, with Mark's help, rebuilt what was left of the Sea Whisper's hull. A hand-carved sign hung above the entrance, the words etched deep. Sea Whisper, reborn. Rex lay nearby in a patch of sunlight, his coat gleaming gold in the late morning light. His ears twitched as children laughed somewhere down the pier. Ethan knelt beside him, resting a calloused hand on the dog's head. We did good, didn't we, buddy? Rex gave a soft whine, his tail brushing against the wood. Mark approached, a camera slung around his neck. They're calling you a hero, he said with a grin. Ethan shook his head. Heroes don't come back. I'm just stubborn. They stood in silence, watching the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly before them, calm and glimmering, as if it too had been cleansed. Ethan's gaze softened. The ocean doesn't curse anyone, he said quietly. Only those who betray it get pulled under. Behind them, the wind carried the smell of salt and new beginnings. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt at peace. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as flashes of light or voices from heaven. They come quietly, through courage, faith, and love that refuses to die. Ethan didn't find gold in the sea. He found redemption. A man once broken by war was healed not by doctors or medals, but by loyalty, by truth, and by the steadfast faith that somewhere above the storm, God still watches. The ocean didn't curse him. It tested him, just as life tests all of us. And when we hold on, when we keep doing what's right, even when no one is watching, that's when the miracle happens. So if you're watching this tonight, remember, every storm ends, every wound heals, and every soul that trusts in goodness will find light again. Let's keep believing in those quiet miracles, in God's hand guiding us through the dark waters of life. May the Lord bless you, protect your home, and calm every storm in your heart. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel, and together let's keep faith alive, one story at a time.